Ghost of Tsushima is the newest PS4 exclusive on the block, and it's got a lot of positive buzz behind it, particularly from the gaming community itself. I spent the better half of last week playing through it, and after spending about 35-40 hours or so with it, I can safely say that I don't really like any of it, and as the title says, I think it's a bit of a mess. I know this will be very controversial, as I seem to be in the vast minority opinion here, and I can't even find anyone else online who doesn't like the game. I mean, hell, the game has the highest user score ever for a PS4 exclusive, which blows my mind. So instead of a traditional review, I wanted to make a bit more of an analysis video this time around. Don't worry if you're coming here expecting one of my normal spoiler-free reviews, I made sure to keep this video spoiler-free as well, at least for the most part. I also want to use this video to talk to people who do enjoy the game, and ask you some questions. If you are someone who has played the game and enjoyed it, I genuinely want to know why, because frankly I just don't get it. I'm going to format this similar to my normal reviews, where I break it into 3 sections, but this video will be a bit longer than usual, and also contain more analysis about the design and storytelling as a whole. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, Ghost of Tsushima is a melee-based game focused around parrying attacks and using different stances to fight different enemies. It's really flashy and fluid, and I gotta say, it just looks so cool. Slicing through enemies feels really satisfying, and I kept wanting to find more combat encounters and learn new moves. Until I hit about the 10-hour mark, when I realized that I had learned pretty much all I needed to know, and that the game was becoming an incredibly easy slog of repetition. You see, what you're watching on screen right now is the full extent of the combat in this game. That's it. It looks really cool at first, but it doesn't evolve in any meaningful way except by giving you broken-ass abilities to make it even easier. It's so simple and surface level, and you will be doing the exact same shit over and over and over and over throughout the entire game. And it really looks amazing at first glance, which makes it so much more disappointing that it never evolves past its initial flash. I played it on hard, which is the hardest difficulty that they offer, and this is without a doubt one of the easiest AAA games I've played in a while. All you do is parry and mash the triangle button. That's it. And the timing for the parries is very forgiving, to the point where a normal parry was just my default block because I barely ever missed it. Changing stances also doesn't do anything except change the animation your character does, because as the player, sure, you change the stance, but you're still just parrying attacks and mashing triangle. It just looks different now. There's no crazy combos or anything special you need to learn, you just mash triangle the whole game. I literally beat boss fights by doing nothing other than pressing triangle the entire time until they died.
A lucky blow! You will not get another!
You sure about that? I'm just pressing triangle right now. Just pressing triangle. I just beat that pressing triangle. I didn't have one other button press but triangle.
And if you're ever in trouble, just put down a smoke, get a quick chain assassination, pull out your slow motion bow and arrow, or use one of the many completely broken special attacks you can unlock, like the Heavenly Strike, which basically just grants you a free hit, or the Wind Dash thing, which basically gives you 3 free hits. And eventually you get to the Ghost stance, which just gives you 3 free kills. And after a while, you don't even really need to change stances anymore, because you can just unlock the ability to parry the once unblockable spear attacks, rendering that stance completely useless because I would just parry and press triangle like every other attack. And you can take out the big guys pretty easily with your special attacks, smoke bombs, arrows, or other throwables. Once I figured this out, I didn't even bother leveling up the other half of my stance skill tree because it was entirely pointless. Most fights just played out with me walking up, getting 2 or 3 free kills in a standoff, and then parrying, mashing triangle, dropping smokes for chain attacks, or shooting someone with the bow. It's unbelievably simple, and it doesn't ever evolve past this. Even in Act 3, when the enemies get a bit more health and damage, you still can just spam your throwables and it becomes a cakewalk again. But all of that is only half of the gameplay, as there is also a stealth aspect. And the stealth is some of the worst I've seen in a AAA game. The enemy detection is embarrassingly bad, and even on hard, they can't see you for shit.
I'm gonna walk to that thing of grass. Let's see. Oh. Nope, it's good. Wow.
And again, like the combat, it's just so easy and mindless. If you step into the tall grass, you essentially go invisible. And if you're ever close to being caught, you can usually just slow-mo shoot an arrow at someone or use your Heavenly Strike attack to take them out in 1 second. But my biggest issue with the stealth isn't how bad the enemy AI is. It's the fact that stealth is entirely pointless because it's just much more time efficient to mow everyone down in combat. There are several missions where you are supposed to play it quietly or the guards will try to kill the prisoners. But instead of sneaking around, I found it much more time effective and just easier to run out, stand next to the prisoner, and fight off the guards, because your array of broken abilities makes it a genuine challenge to let the prisoner be killed. Everything about the gameplay is just so simple, repetitive, and easy, and by the second half of the game, it really starts to create a rift with the story, and actually gives us a really good example of ludonarrative dissonance. Now, I know that is a big galaxy brain word that gets thrown around by people online who want to seem smart and usually don't know what they're talking about, but I actually think it applies here. For those that don't know, ludonarrative dissonance is an instance where the game's story is telling you one thing, but the gameplay tells you the opposite. And when it comes to Ghost of Tsushima, the whole idea is that you are so overwhelmed by this massive Mongol army, and like you're one of the last remaining samurai and half the missions revolve around you recruiting a bunch of companions to help you. I'll get into it in my discussion about the story, but literally the entire arc of the main character is about learning to give up his code of honor, fight dirty, and embrace the spirit of the ghost. There are even specific missions where the game forces you to play it stealthily or gather more allies and plan a strategy before you do anything. Now, narratively, that makes sense. You are vastly outnumbered, and if this were a real event, being sneaky is the only correct choice. The issue is that the gameplay is an incredibly easy, button-mashing power fantasy, which contrasts with this narrative idea of you struggling to get by and striking from the shadows. Your abilities are so broken, and I had no problem wiping out entire squads of Mongols in seconds, so every time the game had a cutscene where people were being all dramatic about the coming enemy attack, or where it made me stop and do some stealth first, or planning, or gathering allies, I was just like, I don't care, just let me at them. The game is easy, and I promise you I can wipe through their entire army at once without any issue, so why is the story trying to tell me to be afraid of everything, when from the gameplay perspective, I haven't seen any hint of a challenge since the beginning? If you want to make a more beat-em-up power fantasy kind of game, that's fine, but in the context of the story that they very clearly want to tell, it makes no sense for it to be that. And even in a power fantasy, there still has to be some sense of progression or evolution. For example, Doom Eternal, which is very much a power fantasy, is an entirely different game at the end from what it is at the start. Ghost of Tsushima is the exact same from start to finish, they just give the enemies some different armor and somehow make it even easier for the player as you progress. I mean, the final mission against the Mongols and the boss battle with Khotan Khan is a total joke of difficulty. I can't describe how simple and repetitive and easy I found the combat, so it was really weird for me to go online and see everyone talking about how hard the game was, even the developers. And I'm just sitting here like, what? Did I play a different game? What happened? Sure, the first 10 hours had some challenge, but after I figured out how surface level everything was, I had zero issues throughout the rest of the game. Is that just me? Like, what happened? I mean, I'm definitely above average in terms of skill, but come on guys, I'm not that good at games. Like, what gives? I will say that the duels are pretty cool though, and I found some occasional challenge in those. But other than that, I just don't get how any of this was anything other than a repetitive slog of the same easy shit over and over. And what do you know, while finishing this video, Sucker Punch released an update that has a new, higher difficulty setting called Lethal. So I went back in and tried it out for a bit, and the gameplay is the exact same. It's just that the damage values are a bit tweaked. Parrying was still very easy, and while the enemies did deal more damage, so do you, which means your broken special attacks are now even more broken. It's certainly a bit better than playing on hard because, like, you can take less hits. So if I was given this difficulty when the game launched, I definitely would have played it like this, but the parry, mash triangle, and spam ability loop is still the exact same. Ghost of Tsushima is also an open world game that is very structurally similar to most other open world games out there, where you have a big map with tons of mission markers, side activities, and random encounters. And just like most other open world games, I think the open world nature leads to a lot of repetition. This is particularly an issue with the mission structure, as it felt like a large chunk of the side missions, and even some of the main missions, were identical, revolving around a set of very simple parts. All missions see you fighting enemies at some point in time, but the rest of the mission just kind of feels like a random combination of up to 3 other components. You either follow a person, you follow tracks, or you just travel to a location marked on the map. Sometimes you follow footprints, fight Mongols, and find a person. Sometimes you follow a person, then fight Mongols, then follow some footprints that weren't there 2 seconds ago, then fight more Mongols. It's a lot of copy and paste, rinse and repeat, and I grew tired of them pretty quickly to the point where I just stopped doing all the side missions.
Oh. No. God
Right this way.
damn it. Don't do it. They're doing it. Ah. No more footprint tracking, please.
I think maybe the repetition of these wouldn't feel as bad if I didn't also find the combat and stealth to be repetitive, but either way, following a person or footprints 20 times over is not interesting or exciting. It also doesn't help that the stories within these side missions were usually pretty bland, and most of the ones I did felt like they followed one of 3 paths. Either it was some guy saying something like, "Oh, my friend was a jagoff and tried to help the Mongols," or it's someone crying about how their family needs help or how they need help. There's no interesting side characters or goofy stories or any of that. And when you're not doing a glorified trailing mission, you are liberating bandit camps, which are certainly fun at first, but like the combat itself, become very repetitive because you're still doing the exact same stuff 40 hours into the game as you were 40 minutes into it. It's especially annoying because the game forces you to watch a cutscene for every single interaction. Now, there is a mission where you have to liberate 6 camps and free 3 prisoners being held at each camp. And every time you free a prisoner, you are forced to go into a cutscene so you can watch them say the same regurgitated "Thank you, Lord Sakai" lines over and over. And then when you liberate the camp, you get to watch this cutscene of the place being liberated with no option to skip any of it. Remember in Far Cry 5 when you liberated a camp and this happened? It's not exactly riveting stuff, but at least it had some nice music and something happening on screen, because this is all we get in Ghost of Tsushima.
Alright. Come on. I don't need to see this. Yeah, I'm falling asleep too, Jin.
It's perfectly fine at first, but when I have to free 18 prisoners and watch the same boring liberation cutscene 6 times over just for that one mission and countless other times for every other camp or prisoner you've ever come across, it becomes incredibly irritating. And dear Lord, you will come across a lot of prisoners because you can't walk 5 feet in the open world without running into a random group of enemies and a peasant tied up. The game also has a really bad habit of cutting to black and forcing you into a weak cutscene every chance it gets, and it will happen with every random, useless NPC conversation, and it's especially annoying when some NPCs repeat the same shit, but you just have to sit there and listen to it again because there's no option to skip it.
Have you seen the birds, Lord Sakai?
What birds are you looking for?
The golden ones. Songs that remind you of more peaceful times. Have you seen the birds, Lord Sakai?
birds
The
are
other
you
guy
looking for?
already just
The
said
golden
this.
ones. Songs that remind
Why
you of
is there
more
no option
peaceful
to skip?
times.
There's also some really fun moments like this, where the game just decides to cut to black randomly.
Fort Koyasan, a nest of traitors. Better scout the fort.
What? Why did it just cut to black?
When every interaction requires a shitty repeated cutscene, and every cutscene requires a fade to black, it really starts to take you out of the action, and it just feels so jank. Especially when the game is 30 to 40 hours long, so you'll be experiencing this the entire time. Since Ghost of Tsushima also has a big open world, it's got an exploration aspect to it. You don't really have much in the way of traversal, but I really like how diegetic the exploration elements are. I love the way the wind guides you to your next objective, and I think it is a fantastic way to get rid of a compass, dotted red line, or giant mission marker floating on your screen at all times. I also like the way animals help guide you, whether that be the golden birds taking you to the missions or side activities, or the foxes leading you to a new shrine. Though, I will say, like much of the game, the fox dens also become pretty repetitive, and actually kind of feel like another form of trailing mission, but at least the initial appeal of them is cool. There's also a bunch of different sections that require you to do some climbing and platforming, and that's where I think the exploration falls apart. Climbing sections in games are never fun, and surprise, surprise, they still aren't fun here. They're boring and just feel like a waste of time. Breath of the Wild is one of the very few games that makes climbing interesting because you can climb on like 95% of things in that game, giving you much more room to actually play the game how you want. In this, you just hold the joystick forward, occasionally press X or R2, and just watch Jin climb. It's never fun, and I don't know why they decided that what the game needed was an entire section of side missions dedicated to climbing the same shit over and over. The game also has a decent bit of jank all around, with certain animations snapping into place, certain animations not working in general, the camera clipping through every object in the area and blocking your view, this enemy clipping through the wall after I killed him, which alerted the guards on the other side, 2 times in a row, during an insta-fail stealth mission.
It happened again! Oh my god, he clipped through the wall.
And the time when the game refused to let me get a critical hit on this bastard right here.
Oh my god, dumb ass game.
And lastly, I just need to say to all the people who cried about killing dogs in Last of Us 2, where did y'all go for this game? I've killed like 10 times as many dogs in this game as I did in The Last of Us, and not a single person online has even mentioned it. So where's the outrage now, huh? In all seriousness though, I think Ghost of Tsushima has some pretty fun samurai gameplay for the first 10 hours or so. And then the remaining 20 are a slog through some of the most repetitive and basic shit I've done in quite a while. It's disappointing because I hoped there would be some sort of progression or evolution, but there really isn't, and the mission structure and side activities all fall flat as well. So, Ghost of Tsushima follows the journey of Jin Sakai, one of the last living samurai of Tsushima, who sets out to kill the Mongol invaders who have taken over his land. The game has a very simple and straightforward story, and I gotta be honest, I don't think any of it is good. It's very bland and predictable, with all the conflict being so surface level. This is a direct problem with the main character Jin, whose entire arc is about him going through a crisis of faith. The problem here is that there's only one correct choice. There's no debate, or any back and forth or gray area. It's a very simple, obvious choice. He is supposed to live a code of honor as a samurai, but when he is literally outnumbered like 300,000 to 1 or something, he's gonna have to fight a little dirty if he wants to win, so he needs to break that code of honor. I already talked about the issue of ludonarrative dissonance in my gameplay section, but from a narrative perspective, there's only one correct choice here. And it's a very easy choice for the player to make, and it's also a very easy choice for Jin to make, as he decides to break his code about 3 hours into the 40-hour game, and he never really looks back. So the rest of that conflict is just his uncle showing up every once in a while to say, honor good, no honor bad, and then walking away, leaving Jin to slaughter the rest of the Mongols and improve his stealth skills. The characters in general are also very static, and I actually think the only one that changes at all is Jin. But he pretty much completes his arc after that 3-hour mark, and that's basically the extent of his change. And he doesn't really do anything throughout the rest of the game from a character sense. There isn't any back and forth about his decision to become the ghost either. I mean, every time his uncle complains about it, Jin is basically just like, yeah, it sucks, but it's what we have to do, we're at war. So his mind is very clearly made up, and he doesn't waver on that view. I also find it funny that the game whose main theme is all about honor doesn't have an honor system or different endings based on how you play, which kind of feels like wasted potential. If this game actually allowed your actions or approach to the game to affect the story, I think that might have been an interesting way for them to play up the dilemma about honor, but as it stands right now, the game just decides for you. And while I normally prefer when a game tells the story it wants to, in this case, it feels really weird because 1, I think they do a really poor job in general, but 2, Jin is not a very well-defined character. He feels like a half-character, half-user insert. Because the game loves to give you all these random dialogue options that mean nothing. It's like they wanted to give the player ways to play how they want or choose their path, but that doesn't match up with the story because the story is already very clearly defined with no room to change it. It feels like they got stuck in the middle, and I think they should have either gone for the honor system or just made the game linear so they could focus a lot on making a really well-defined set of characters and story beats. Because when you force yourself to spread a story out over 40 hours, you're gonna run the risk of the pacing getting destroyed. And for me, that's definitely what happened, because I found it really hard to care about any of the characters when I only ever see them for a few hours in a brief and uninteresting cutscene. That is especially true for the game's main villain, Khotan Khan. He feels really underused and frankly, kinda boring. He's basically just a Marvel movie villain where he's bad because he's bad. And while you certainly can have a purely evil villain, it doesn't really work as well when he's barely there. This is a 40-hour game, and counting the boss fights, the main villain is on screen for a total of about 30 minutes, which does not help me become interested in him. And the cutscenes themselves just aren't very good, and it feels like every shot is just some locked off, basic, standard shot of people talking to each other, and they just added some black bars and said, well, now it's cinematic, and called it a day. They said that Akira Kurosawa was a huge influence on the game, and they even have a Kurosawa filter for the game, but aside from a few scenes and the exaggerated wind effects, I feel like they completely missed what makes his shots and composition so interesting. Kurosawa was very big on the way he used movement to convey the story, characters, and themes, whether that be background movement, character movement, or camera movement. He always had a visually interesting way of displaying things. And then cut to this game where every shot is this static scene of people standing in place having a conversation. The weak facial animations also don't help, and it's really disappointing to see such bland cutscenes. Now, I'm not expecting every shot to be super dynamic or anything, but it should at least be better than this stiff, lifeless paint-by-number shot setup they have. I mean, come on, a lot of the main story cutscenes look about as basic as those annoying NPC interactions. The audio in the game is also really poorly mixed, and there are times when characters' dialogue would go from a whisper to loud as shit, or vice versa.
Open the gate and save them!
Your uncle's looking for you. I heard the Khan took his castle.
And there's several moments where the game's writing just makes absolutely zero sense. Like this, for example. There's a series of missions you do with the Straw Hat Ronin, where you need to search for food for them. It goes on for so long, and you go to like 2 or 3 different places on the map, and they never end up finding food. Which initially feels a bit weird because, like, we just raided 2 Mongol camps, okay? I call bullshit on there not being any food. But it's even worse than that because as soon as you walk 5 feet outside, there's a shit ton of wild deer, boars, and bears just running around. Why can't we go hunt them? They also live on a fucking island, so just go fishing. And there are a ton of safe camps, towns, and farms spread across the map. And while sure, the towns aren't overflowing with goods, there seems to be enough to go around considering the fact that Jin tells several random peasants to travel to these places to take refuge. And if they were that in need of food, they could very easily just kill one of the Mongol horses and eat that, okay? It's not like they don't have a bunch of different options here. This dire food shortage feels so artificial and contrived that it makes the whole story arc with the Ronin incredibly weak because it all revolves around this food shortage. I won't spoil it here, but it is a pretty big part of the story, and it's impossible for me to care at all because it starts off on such a dumb, contrived bit of writing. There are several moments like this that just left me scratching my head, asking why. I will say that I do like the overall narrative idea of Jin becoming the ghost and giving up on his past life to do what's right, but I think they do a pretty poor job of conveying the idea, and the resolution just feels weak because the game kind of just continues on and acts like nothing from the past 40 hours really happened and you're just spat back out into the world in case you wanted to go do some more side missions. Overall, I just think the story is not good. All the conflict is very surface level, and the writing has some really brainless moments. There are occasionally a few other interesting ideas on the surface, but any flashes of engagement get buried under poor execution, weak characters, and boring cutscenes. So the art and design aspect of the game is where Ghost of Tsushima really thrives, at least for the most part. The world is gorgeous, and I love the exaggerated colors and particle effects. Photo mode is really fun to use, and the addition of a new option to keep the world moving allows for the player to create some incredible pan or dolly shots like this. It is truly a wonder to behold, but unfortunately, it isn't without its faults either. One thing that I certainly noticed was the constant repetition of the buildings and landmarks in the game, because much like every other aspect of the game, you will see the same shit repeated over and over. I mean, seriously, all these buildings look exactly the same, and a large chunk of them are exactly the same. The interiors are almost always barren, save for a few materials or the occasional document you can pick up, and I always felt like once I saw something, I then saw it a million times over. Still, the environment design is really nice, except for whoever decided to turn the brightness up to 30 here, and the textures are really good, mostly. But it does have a good soundtrack. I don't have a complaint there. The soundtrack actually is pretty good. It's disappointing to see so much repetition in every aspect of the game, and it really makes me feel like this should have just been significantly shorter and probably not even open world. I think open world games always tend to have these issues, and I'm honestly tired of games that just follow the same standard Ubisoft open world formula. I was hoping that Ghost of Tsushima would be able to stand above that, or at the very least, just have some interesting aspect to it, but in my opinion, it's kinda weak on all fronts and just ends up being a pretty mediocre game. And I think all the issues that this game has are doubled and tripled due to its open world nature. There are only a certain amount of missions, side activities, or stories you can make in a game like this before you start to retread over old things and start copying and pasting. And when you are forcing yourself to fill out content for such a big world, you can very easily run into the issue of repeating these mediocre things over and over again just to fill the space. Which is why I really think this game should not have been open world, because I don't think any aspect of it is improved by it being open world. Aside from maybe the wind being a cool way to guide you, but that's about it. What is it about following tons of footprints or doing endless bandit camps that is still entertaining after 10, 20, 30, 40 hours? What is it about following a fox or watching 2 minutes of climbing animations that would make me want to do these things for the entire rest of the game? In this case, the answer to both is nothing. I really think this game should have been significantly smaller and linear, and even if they still really wanted to make it open world, it should have been restricted to a much smaller area so that all the actual good stuff can be at the forefront of it all. I would much rather play a 10-hour game that is consistently engaging instead of a 40-hour game that is filled with a bunch of mediocre bullshit spread thin to make the world seem full. Hell, if we're being honest, I'd much rather play a 2-hour game that was constantly engaging instead of a 40-hour game filled with nothing. In the end, I don't think Ghost of Tsushima is terrible, but after finishing it, I genuinely can't tell you a single mission that stood out to me, a single story beat that I thought was really impactful, or a single gameplay moment that I remembered, aside from all the dumbass shit that occurred. As I said at the start, I would love to hear from you guys, because I seem to be in the vast minority with my opinion here. So, if you're someone who enjoyed it, I ask, what did you think of the combat? Are there any missions that you actually remember because you thought they were good? Why did you find the story interesting? And lastly, how do you play games? I feel like if you're someone who plays games for like an hour or two a day, or maybe a few hours a week, you might not be as affected by the repetition. But as someone who played for around maybe 5 hours a day for about 7 to 8 days straight, this felt like one of the most repetitive experiences ever. If I had to give it a rating, I would definitely say that it's about a 5. It has nice visuals, has some good initial flash, but the story never picks up, and the combat stays repetitive and easy throughout the entire game. Alright guys, if you made it this far, thanks for hearing me out, and if you're going to comment something, thanks for adding to the discussion. I love video games, and I love talking about them even more, so it's nice to have times like this where we can disagree and hopefully still discuss. I'm saying that assuming that this doesn't get, dislike bombed or anything. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out some of my other reviews, stay tuned for more updates about my own game, and I'll see you in the next video.